She stood frozen in the hallway, the sound of laughter cutting into her like knives. Her dress hung in tatters, ripped down the back in front of dozens of students. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with restraint. Then, without saying a word, she turned around. And in a single, clean motion, she dropped the biggest bully with one swift karate chop. The laughter stopped. Silence filled the hallway. And that was the day everything changed. Miss Leona Taylor was not what the students at Ridgeway High expected. She was soft-spoken, polite to the point of awkwardness, and dressed in long skirts and buttoned blouses. With her shoulder-length hair tied in a low bun and her glasses slipping down her nose, most students assumed she was just another substitute who wouldn't last the month. But behind her quiet demeanor was a past none of them could imagine. Leona had always wanted to teach. From the moment she was a child, she loved books, stories, and the magic of learning. But her journey to the classroom hadn't been easy. She had battled severe anxiety all her life. Speaking in front of people made her palms sweat and her voice shake. She had been bullied in school herself, mocked for being too quiet or too weird. For a long time, she believed she'd never be strong enough to handle a room full of teenagers. But something had changed in her after college. One night, walking home, Leona had been followed. When she tried to cross the street, the men behind her grabbed her shoulder. She froze, paralyzed by fear. But something inside her snapped, something deep, something primal. The next morning, she signed up for martial arts classes. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She trained in silence for 4 years, pushing through fear and sweat, until her quiet hands could block, flip, and strike with precision. She earned her black belt in Shotokan karate not to fight, but to never feel helpless again. Now, standing in the halls of Ridgeway High, she had hoped to leave that part of herself behind. But fate had other plans. The trouble began her second week on the job. She was teaching English literature to a group of juniors who had already scared off 3 teachers before her. At the center of the chaos was a student named Chad Morgan, loud, entitled, and used to getting away with everything. Chad and his friends ran the hallways like a gang. They mocked other students, posted cruel memes, and laughed during lessons. When Miss Taylor politely asked them to quiet down or participate, they sneered and ignored her. "She's a doormat," Chad said one day, loud enough for half the class to hear. "She's not gonna do anything." The other students laughed. Miss Taylor said nothing. She simply turned back to the board and continued the lesson. But her silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. One morning, things went too far. Miss Taylor had stayed late the night before grading essays and was walking down the main hallway toward the teacher's lounge. It was early. Most students weren't there yet. Except for Chad and 2 of his friends. They were leaning against the lockers, whispering and laughing. As she passed them, one of them said, "Nice dress, Miss Taylor. Vintage grandma vibes." She didn't react. She just kept walking. Then it happened. In a flash, Chad reached out and grabbed the back of her dress, yanking hard. The fabric tore down the back, exposing her undershirt and leaving her frozen in shock. The boys burst into laughter. Other students began trickling in. Some stared. A few pulled out phones. Miss Taylor stood perfectly still. For a moment, it felt like she was 14 again, back in school, being mocked for stuttering or tripping over her words. But then something else took over. The training. The strength. The woman she had become. She turned slowly. Chad was still laughing, not seeing it coming. One clean step. One twist of her hips. And with a sharp, controlled karate chop to the side of his neck, she dropped him flat on the ground. The hallway went dead silent. His friends backed up instantly, hands raised. "We were just joking." Miss Taylor looked at them, calm and steady. "Walk away. Now." They did. The principal was called. Parents were called. Videos went viral. At first, there was outrage. A teacher hit a student. She used violence. But the full video told the truth. And so did the dozens of students who came forward. She didn't start it. She told them to stop for days. They ripped her dress. An internal investigation cleared her of any wrongdoing. Chad and his friends were suspended. Miss Taylor returned to class a week later. This time, the room was quiet for a different reason. Respect. Something changed in the school after that. Miss Taylor didn't become loud or strict. She didn't yell or threaten. But her presence carried a new weight. Students began to listen, not out of fear, but out of recognition. She had stood up. Not just for herself, but for every quiet student who had ever been pushed, mocked, or ignored. Over time, she started a self-defense club for girls who had been bullied. She gave free lessons after school, using the same methods that once saved her. And she taught more than just literature. She taught courage, discipline, and the quiet power of knowing your worth. Final message. Never mistake silence for weakness. Some of the strongest people speak softly, walk gently, and carry storms within them. Miss Taylor didn't fight to hurt anyone, she fought to remind the world that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it strikes with grace.